What if the right school for your child isn't even on the plan? Maybe the school written into their EHCP looks good on paper, but in reality it's no longer the right fit. Maybe your child's needs have changed, or maybe they were never fully understood to begin with. Naming a school on a child's EHCP isn't just a tick box exercise, it's a legal guarantee. And without it, there is no obligation to meet your child's needs. So why do many of us parents find that this crucial information is left unattended, especially during moments of crisis or transition, when things aren't working or when change is coming? Having the right school named in the plan can be the difference between moving forward and falling further behind. So in this video, I'll look at the common setbacks that usually lead to this section being left unattended, or naming a school that simply isn't suitable. I'll explore why these setbacks can happen and what can unfold if they're left unaddressed, so that we as parents can stay informed, empowered and ready to advocate so that our child's next school isn't just an option, but the right one. My name is Brenda and I'm a parent mentor and a fellow parent. I support parents raising children with individual needs and differences to stay empowered whilst they navigate through procedural challenges. And I recognise that by having a school named on your child's support plan is essential. It means that your child has a confirmed place at a setting that is specifically prepared to meet their identified needs, with the right support, resources and staffing already in place. It also ensures that everyone involved in working in your child's education is all working from the same page, with a shared understanding of where and how your child will be supported moving forward. Because confusion and frustration arises when you then realise that an important section has been left out, is not what you expected, or is unsuitable for your child's needs moving forward, which can lead to misdirected efforts, wasted resources, or worsening the situation further. Therefore, it's important to uncover the reasons why behind these challenges in order to identify more effective ways to address it. And one setback that can lead to this predicament is when there is the control of access. This may be where you're told you have a choice, that you're free to express a preference, to find the right school that feels the best fit for your child. So you research, you ask questions, you visit schools, but slowly each option you hoped for is taken off the table. Not because the schools are full, not because you haven't followed the process, but because of something more subtle and often more damaging. You're told that your child's needs are too complex, that their support might disrupt other children, that another school on the local authority's list is more realistic. And this is where parental choice begins to feel a bit like an illusion. It's where, in my experience, it's a form of quiet gatekeeping and your preferences are quietly redirected. Some schools may be removed from consideration without an explanation, or say that they just can't meet it. Others may refuse to consider the support that your child needs, and what's left is often a short list of placements that feel inadequate. Let's say the best of a bad bunch. You may be encouraged or even slightly pressured to apply for multiple settings, only to be declined again and again. And in the end, you may be left with one school, the only school that's willing to say yes, even if as a parent, you know in your gut that it's completely unsuitable. And at the same time, discouragements with the local authority over what's considered suitable provision can make the process even harder. They might suggest an interim or an alternative placement, often without meaningful discussion, and label your concerns as unreasonable if you push back. The result, a process that should feel collaborative but for some reason doesn't feel that way. In my experience, it's felt that perhaps your child needs to take a back seat to what is deemed as what's convenient, available or easy to manage administratively. And in those cases, it can feel like being pushed towards accepting a limited option out of desperation, just to avoid further delays. And this is why advocacy is so important, because access shouldn't be controlled by hidden gatekeeping. It should be guided by your child's needs and their right to a setting that supports them to thrive. And another setback that leads to predicaments like these is when there's a need for greater responsibility. So when it comes to securing your child in the right school, trusting in the process really does matter. So does follow through. But far too often, some of us experience the opposite: broken commitments, lack of accountability, and no one clearly responsible for making sure promised actions are actually delivered. You may be told that help is available, that support services, professionals and local authorities are working in partnership with you. But in practice, it feels very much different. Some of us experience dead ends, where communication comes from anonymous inboxes, where no named person takes accountability and where you're passed from one service to another without answers. Others experience inconsistent communication, or worse, experience those who have a duty of care to support your child contradicting themselves, failing to follow agreed plans or making major decisions without consultation or documentation. But when promises are made and yet not followed through, or when concerns are dismissed or reframed as overreactions, it doesn't just create frustration, it creates harm. And as parents, it then becomes easy to feel ignored or blamed, especially during review meetings that significantly impact a child's well-being, like changes to care routines or removal of support that's been put in place, but done without a plan, without consent, or with any consideration for the impact that it would have on a child. And when those decisions aren't reviewed by a joined-up team across education, health and care, the child ends up bearing the consequences of poor communication and disjointed practice. And this lack of responsibility and transparency reinforces the need for something stronger, a culture of more accountability. Because when critical assessments are delayed, sometimes for over a year, or when key information such as an educational psychologist report goes missing, the result is an EHCP or a support plan that doesn't reflect the child's current needs. And without that evidence, it becomes nearly impossible to be able to advocate for the right support, such as perhaps as one-to-one support in the classroom or tailored therapies. And this is why responsibility matters, not just in theory, but also in practice. It's about observing and witnessing and seeing those that have a duty of care to follow up and be held accountable for when they don't. Because behind every missed deadline and broken promise is a child whose needs are not being met. And another setback that leads to predicaments like this is where there is a lack of consideration for parent feedback. So when it comes to naming a school and the EHCP, parental voices should be central. After all, no one else has a more clearer, consistent understanding of a child's needs than a parent or a carer. But there are times when that voice is minimised or sidelined or treated like an obstacle rather than a resource. You may be told that your views will be taken into account, that your preferences will be considered, unless doing so would impact the efficient education of others or the efficient use of resources. But in reality, this principle is quietly bypassed, using vague objections, inflexible systems, or dismissive responses, instead of openness and collaboration, which can lead to feeling like you're just talking to a brick wall. You share concerns, you suggest alternatives, you advocate for your child based on lived experiences. But instead of dialogue, you receive silence. And the longer it goes on, the more powerless you can begin to feel. It makes me think, what options do parents have, especially if the cost of, say, a private assessment is not an option? And how frustrating it is when you see that the results that can come from having the information available that could come from a private assessment where things are done correctly. Support plans are received with perhaps more details and there's some creative bespoke support in place. And it can seem like without this specialist evidence, a parent's feedback can sometimes feel less credible and your child's needs less urgent. The emotional toll can be overwhelming, the meetings can start to take a toll and the anxiety builds. And eventually some of us find ourselves saying yes to things we just don't agree with. When real concerns such as your child's distress, injuries, it can feel like our insight doesn't count or matter. What's left is not real choice but compliance. A sense of going through the motions in a process that may feel like it's being done to you, not with you. And that's why meaningful parent partnership isn't a box ticking exercise, it's essential. And because when parents are pushed aside, children lose out. And when your voice is silenced, so is your child's chances of receiving the education and support that they require. And another setback that leads to predicaments like this is when there is inconsistent professionalism. This is where you ask the right questions, you follow the process, you show up to meetings and try to work collaboratively. But the answers you get are vague, incomplete, non-committal, just clear enough to just keep things going, but never specific enough to hold anyone accountable. For many of us, this is where the process starts to feel limiting. You rely on those that have the duty of care to help identify your child's needs and recommend the right support. But when assessments are delayed or skipped entirely, vital information is missing. This is where assessment reports don't arrive on time, health input is inconsistent, multi-agency planning becomes fragmented or disappears altogether, and what should be a coordinated evidence-based approach quickly turns into a guessing game. And without proper documentation, monitoring or joined up communication between services and decision makers, decisions are made in isolation, often based on incomplete or outdated information. It can delay naming a child's school on an EHCP, especially when transitioning between settings or key stages. And it can leave a sinking feeling that unless you can afford private assessments, clarity and accountability will remain out of reach. So what's the result? Support becomes a patchwork. Provision fluctuates in quality, and your child, the person this entire process is supposed to support, is left to navigate confusion, delay and unmet needs. And when this occurs, it becomes harder for those who have a duty of care to respond appropriately. As it undermines trust, it reduces outcomes, and it increases the risk that an EHCP remains vague. And this is why informed, persistent advocacy matters, because without it, vague promises replace concrete support. Naming a school or a provision on an EHCP is not just about choosing the best option. It's about having the right evidence, agency and support to ensure that the chosen setting meets the child's individual needs in a meaningful, specified and monitored way. And by understanding why these challenges arrive, we will begin to address it more effectively. And this is why staying empowered as a parent to advocate for your child's needs is the best way to create positive progress. And if working with a mentor sounds like something that would work for you, why not contact me? The information is in the description box below. But for now, keep doing what you're doing, stay focused, stay empowered, and keep creating progress. Thank you for listening.